We are eventually going to run into the existential givens at some point in life. And if you do this proactively and you kind of engage with these ideas and these things that we're never going to really get away from eventually, then whenever the time comes and the shit does hit the proverbial fan, you're ready and you've built the muscles to sort of, get through the situation. And it's not going to be easy, but you're going to be able to navigate those circumstances better because you've kind of done this front loading. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And I mean, it doesn't shield you, right? It's not supposed to. My dad died last year. It didn't protect me against the grief. It didn't protect me against, the how in what complex ways this can influence you, and it throws you. But I'm convinced that if I hadn't explored my relationship with endings and death, if I hadn't made this something that I recognize, and it takes some courage sometimes to face your parents dying and what would be then. And so I think it helps people to have confronted these possibilities and grappled with some of these thoughts and some of these ideas and some of these possibilities, so that when they do hit you, they still hit you. But I think you're better prepared to, recover better, because it's not just, you're not going to be in free fall and paralyzed and having to make sense of everything. Somebody you love will definitely die, and maybe soon. Who knows? Right? But avoiding that will get us in much bigger trouble when it actually happens, because we haven't built the resources to then deal with it.
Okay, Yannick, welcome to the show. For anybody that isn't familiar with you, how would you describe yourself and what you do?
Who are you? The big existential question. Look, there's 100 million ways to answer this, and none of them will quite capture who somebody is. There are some kind of elements to me that make it more clear, right? So the bio is I like holding space for people to help them figure things out. I'm quite philosophically minded, so I work as a coach. I work as somebody who supports coaches, but also I work as an existential coach. That means I help people to tune in and figure out some of these bigger philosophical questions that are always underneath the surface of what anybody is experiencing. That's why I like existential philosophy, because the big questions, they're always there. Who am I? How can I be authentic? What do I do with my time? How do I relate to endings? How do I navigate an uncertain world? How do I experience otherness? And how other people always remind me of how I'm different. How do I find my people, my tribe, meaning, purpose? How do I make this mean something? What does it mean to exist? So these are the big questions that really excite me. And I learned through my work as a coach working with people that they're always active, regardless of how mundane something seems that people want as a goal, or, what they want to achieve in work or in relationships, or, somebody might want to buy a new phone and they despair because every choice excludes other possibilities. Or, I'm sure there's many people out there who just struggle to choose lunch from a menu or dinner. And there's philosophical stuff operating whenever somebody makes any decision. There's relationships with endings and uncertainty. And what if I make the wrong choice? What is a wrong choice? So I love that kind of stuff. And I have learned through studying positive psychology first, applied positive psychology, what is right with people, how can we be happy, how can we live a good life, and then kind of opening the depth of philosophy around all of that stuff. I just love working with people, figuring out how to navigate their life and their work. So whether that's the leadership condition, which weighs heavily on somebody's relationship with responsibility, whether it's becoming a parent, transitioning in or out of romantic relationships, I like quite a big diversity in my clientele, because I'm someone who likes novelty and diversity, and I like to work with lots of different people. I like to look kind of everywhere and then pull it together and see patterns and themes. So that's me professionally.
Beautiful, beautiful. Something that comes to mind for me is what you said there about these questions are always there, right? They're always operating in some level. And I remember a conversation when I was maybe about 19 or 20. I was sitting in a room with a group of friends, and I brought up something about something I was watching at the time, something to do with like Bill Hicks or something. And
Love Bill Hicks.
Someone goes, "Oh, that's deep. That's deep." But it was said in a way like derogatory, like you shouldn't go there. And it made me realize that not everybody is comfortable with these big existential questions, and they would prefer not to go there. So just what are your thoughts on someone like that? Because there's people in my life that just don't want to go there. What do you think?
Well, I think I'm probably not the right coach for them. And I also think they're missing out. And at the same time, I get it, right? I used to look kind of down on people who were kind of avoiding the depth and didn't want to go there. And I stopped because I understand it's natural to long for simplicity, to long for clarity. And there's so many people out there who offer clarity and simplicity. It's like there was this beautiful cartoon that had like this Wegweiser, the signs of direction, and there were so many people on the path that is untrue but clear and simple and easy, and there's people who walk the long, winding, uncertain, I don't know what's going to happen road, because that's what life is. Life isn't clear and simple. There's moments of clarity and simplicity, and we don't need to overcomplicate things. But life is very complex with lots of webs of interrelated systems and all of these influences working on us. And we carry so much paradox and tension in us. That's what most psychologies and philosophies recognize. Part of the human condition, part of being alive means there's this stuff happening inside all the time. That's why we despair, and that's why there's dilemmas, and it's hard to choose. And we have so many different parts in us. I want to belong, but I also want to be myself. I want to stick out and be different and be recognized for being different. I want attention. But when I'm too different or I have a lot of attention, it's uncomfortable, right? So people get shit done when they have a deadline. It's literally a deadline. But also we don't want to think about endings or death. It adds pressure, but it also helps us to move and take action, right? So there's all this complexity that makes sense to want to avoid. It makes life temporarily more comfortable and manageable. And sometimes we really need life to be manageable because we just need to hold ourselves together. But sooner or later, we'll edge with the existential givens, as we call them in philosophy, right? We'll run into, for example, the COVID-19 pandemic was a collective experience of running into endings and uncertainty and isolation and all of these meaning structures collapsed all of a sudden. And people who were in industries and jobs that they thought were certain and safe and stable, all of a sudden were not certain, safe, and stable anymore. Then you sit at home and, not being able to escape the people that are around you, and you realize, oh, that's not actually what I thought it was. And so life can be quite fragile in that way. And sooner or later, we'll run into the existential givens, the things that are woven into the fabric of what it means to be human. And we can tell ourselves a story that life is more simple, but sooner or later, we'll be confronted with death and isolation and absurdity and uncertainty and anxiety. It's always there. So to someone who doesn't want to go into depth because maybe it's a bit scary or uncomfortable or eerie, it is all of that. And I think there's a ton of value in facing it when we're relatively resourced and relatively well. Most people go see an existential therapist when they can't cope anymore and they're in a deep hole and everything collapsed and now they have to make sense of it. I think we can build more what I call existential resilience. when we face some of these philosophical questions and recognize them and come to terms with endings and the other givens in a time that we're still resourced to have those conversations and to face those kind of things from a position of strength. And then it feels a bit uncomfortable and we might shake our foundations a bit, but then we rebuild them stronger. And that way we can build a philosophical foundation, so to speak, that allows like a worldview, a belief system that helps us, that grounds us, but it's not so rigid that once somebody picks at it and takes something out, it collapses and we fall. It's solid, so we're grounded, but it's flexible that new stuff can be invited in. And so that makes for a more resilient, better grounded, more stable life, work, relationships, existence.
I've never thought about that before, but that strikes me as such an important idea that these we are eventually going to run into the existential givens at some point in life. And if you do this proactively and you kind of engage with these ideas and these things that we're never going to really get away from eventually, then whenever the time comes and the shit does hit the proverbial fan, you're ready and you've built the muscles to sort of, get through the situation. And it's not going to be easy, but you're going to be able to navigate those circumstances better because you've kind of done this front loading. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And I mean, it doesn't shield you, right? It's not supposed to. One of my clients once described resilience as this layer of Kevlar that just everything just pearls off. And that's not what we're going for. That doesn't exist, right? So, my dad died last year, right? What last year? Technically last year, it's early January, but it's been 6 months. And it didn't protect me against the grief. It didn't protect me against, the how in what complex ways this can influence you and it throws you. But I'm convinced that if I hadn't explored my relationship with endings and death, if I hadn't made this something that I recognize, and it takes some courage sometimes to face your parents dying, and what would be then? Right? There's a possibility that my 4-year-old daughter dies. I saw this part of the show yesterday. This, like when you're a parent and you watch something where the kid dies and it's well made, it really hits different, right? But it is a possibility. There is a possibility that my daughter might get hit by a truck. I don't want to anticipate that, but I also don't want to live as if that sort of thing can never happen. So, kind of allowing this, what often is characterized as very dark thoughts, dark existential philosophy, and we're all going to die and nothing really means anything, or there's this nihilistic camp of existential thought that is, I get why people want to avoid it, but also you can't really say that there's nothing to it, right? If there is an overarching meaning of life, we wouldn't have the capacity to have any sort of certainty around it, right? So I think it helps people to have confronted these possibilities and grappled with some of these thoughts and some of these ideas and some of these possibilities, so that when they do hit you, they still hit you. But I think you're better prepared to, recover better, because it's not just, you're not going to be in free fall and paralyzed and having to make sense of everything. It's just one of the things that you knew might or will happen to you on someday, right? Your parents will die someday, and if you're lucky, they die earlier than you, right? That's very likely. Somebody you love will definitely die, and maybe soon. Who knows, right? But avoiding that will get us in much bigger trouble when it actually happens, because we haven't built the resources to then deal with it. So yeah, I think building that kind of existential resilience by allowing us to face some of these things, that's it's not crucial. I can't make anybody do this. I would like to invite some people to maybe take a look at that, but people have to choose. to engage in these kind of conversations in facing this. And that's why I like coaching so much. Or, therapy is also a space where it could be a good friend. It could be a family member, somebody who knows how to hold space in a non-judgmental way and engages you in a safe way, uh, allowing your mind to think some dark thoughts and see how you make sense of that. But having somebody who's coming in from the outside, who you don't necessarily need to see ever again, it's just somebody who's trained at holding that sort of space and not saving you, not jumping in to rescue you with their own solutions. There's so many people who say they've figured life out, and then they give you what they've figured out. And it's very tempting to take somebody else's answers to the existential questions. The thing is, the existential questions don't have one answer. You need to create your own. There's so many different ways you can relate to endings and death and authenticity. And what does it mean? What does it mean to live a good life? What is a meaningful way to spend your time? Somebody would say it's about helping other people. Somebody would say it's to have as much fun as possible. I can't tell somebody how to best live their life. It's your time. It's not my time. People have different value systems. People have different beliefs because we've grown up in different ways and we've been given different stories, right? So it makes sense that everybody has to find their own way to make choices and then deal with the consequences and own them. And that's really, I get really energized by that work, that I don't want people to have regrets later about how they lived their lives, regardless of how they lived their lives. I've met some people I really disagree with how they live their lives, but in their framework, it makes perfect sense. So when I remember this guy who I've engaged and challenged quite heavily on his way of living, because I just thought, you're going to cause so much pain, and this is just like, what are you doing? That's crazy. And turns out it wasn't crazy. I just really disagreed with it. But his underlying assumptions were very hedonistic. And, he was like, well, if I die at age 30, I'll die at age 30. I've lived. It's about the quality of the years, not about the number of years that I live. And as much as I disagreed with it, I just like, I get it. I get it. It's like the avoiding depth part. Like somebody might want to live a very flat life, like flat as in like nothing much happening, not going out of their comfort zone, staying as comfortable as possible. Like, you're going to miss out on so many experiences of joy and hate and heartbreak and excitement. And I would like to experience maybe not as much as possible, because, there's people that really take that to the extreme. They go, wingsuit diving, and then they're like in deep crisis somewhere. And like the manic depressive end, it's arguably a very rich life. Right? Maybe wingsuit diving, a short one, but like, yeah, I don't want to go to that extreme, but I do want to get a lot of experiences. I would feel I've missed out if I'm at the end of my life and I didn't feel like I've made use of my time on this planet, which is essentially quite short. But I respect if somebody makes a conscious decision to keep themselves safe and comfortable, and maybe not have the waves peak and trough so much, as long as that's a conscious decision. And that's really what, for me, the existential philosophy is about. It's like, you choose, man. Like, I can't tell you what's right and wrong. Only you can decide what's right and wrong. Ethics is not the law. It's like, I don't believe there's a universal morality. I believe people need to decide what's right and wrong for them, and then own the consequences of their actions or lack of action.
So much there. With regards to, you said something about sort of whenever you do make a decision and you've got to own the consequences of that. There's a great chapter in one of Oliver Burkeman's book about this, and it's something like, you can do whatever you want in life as long as you're willing to own the consequences. And whenever you really wrap your head around that, it's very freeing, but a little bit scary too. Like, you mentioned there about there's no kind of capital M meaning or no capital P purpose to all of this. In your view, what do you feel well, maybe isn't the right question to ask, but I'll ask it anyway. What do you feel the purpose of existence is? Like, why do you think human beings exist? Like, why is there something rather than nothing? Why is there the human experience? Like, why do we wake up on this floating rock going around a giant fireball in space?
Well, I could only give you my answer, but that's precisely what I mean. I don't think my answer necessarily matters. I mean, maybe somebody can get inspired by that or get challenged by it and then double down on their answer to what's purposeful. Um, I can't say generally what's purposeful because I don't think that exists. Right? For every purpose that I can think of, I can think of a person that sits somewhere in the world that for whom it's a despicable purpose to have in life. Right? Save the children from cancer. How dare you? We need less people in the world. It's destroying the planet. you know, I mean, how? Just have fun? No, you need to connect with other people. What? Connect with other people? No, you need to make as much use of your own time as you want because it's your life. And why do you live for everybody else? So, I mean, there's for everything, there's a spectrum, right? So, what I have learned from positive psychology is that it feels good for most people most of the time to have good relationships with at least some people, if not a lot of people, to have a sense of personal meaning and purpose in your life, to have a sense of growth or, let's say, change, right? That you feel you're developing, whether that's consciously downsizing or growing and expanding, right? That there's meaningful movement in your life. What contributes to psychological well-being is that we feel we have the competence to deal with our environment, right? That we have the set of skills that allows us to exist competently in whatever context we're in. We need different skills when we're living in the jungle in the Amazonian, or if we're living in the jungle of a big city, you know? And we need we want to have some positive emotions in our life. We want to have some pleasant emotions. I don't want to say positive because I don't think there's positive and negative. There's pleasant and uncomfortable emotions, I think, challenging ones, right? So what contributes to psychological well-being is to have like pleasant emotions, comfortable emotions, positive. Maybe if you regard challenging emotions as positive, that's, we need some of that. So all these things, they contribute to psychological well-being. We know that from research, but then also research doesn't take into account the outliers. By outliers, it's a when it comes to research, we need to look into how statistics are being created. If we measure 1,000 people and their ideas or their answers to a questionnaire or what they think makes life worth living, if you have one person that is completely different to all the others, it's a valid statistical method to just get rid of that person from your data set, to just eliminate it. The idea behind it is actually quite valid. It's that person has misunderstood the questionnaire or has just filled it out at random or made some sort of mistake, or maybe they just want to fuck with your data set. Who knows? So statistically, it's a valid operation to get rid of that person. But if you coach, that outlier might be a real person with really quite different ideas about what makes people happy and what makes them happy. And so I can't tell them based on science, this is you and this is how you should be living life because look at all these other people. Do you know what I mean? So I don't believe in universal answers, but we can see certain trends. That's where the bell curve comes from, right? Most in psychological social sciences, if we're 95% confident that this result that we got is not by chance, then we have a good result. Good enough. That's 95% of people or 95% of situations. That leaves a huge number of people at the end, at the either end of the bell curve, right? So we can certainly look at trends and we can scale knowledge and we can write books about what helps most people most of the time. But when it comes to one-to-one conversations, well, you might just be a bit different when it comes to this. and you might have not quite recognized or embraced that you're a bit different. Right? That's why there's so many people, they read self-help books and they feel really bad about themselves because they're like, this stuff isn't working for me. I have a very different relationship with goals, for example. Like, I'm not a very goal-focused driven person. If you give me a really good strategy, I'll find it really hard to just follow through with it. And I marvel at the people who just get a blueprint and just do that. Right? I don't seem to have the capacity to do that, because my brain is not wired like that. So I read some of the self-help books about habits and goals, and I'm like, I used to feel bad because I can't seem to get it done like that. Even though it seems simple and I understand all the psychology behind it, it's really difficult for me to build these kind of habits. But yeah, I'm wired differently. So, that's why I think these coaching spaces are so important for people, because you can kind of normalize what your struggles are and what you feel bad about. And maybe you don't need to feel so bad about it. Maybe that's just something that a lot of people experience. And maybe it's only something that a few people experience. But if you compare yourself to the people under the bell curve, well, chances are that you're going to feel weird. And some people really own their weirdness and they get very rich because of it. Other people really suffer because we are social animals and we like and we need to connect with others. It's one of the things that is built into our evolution. We need to feel connected. And in today's day and age, even though we are more connected than ever, we're also less connected than ever. So to find our people and to connect to them in meaningful, authentic ways is easier than ever, but also more difficult than ever. And I think that's one of the big challenges of our time.
For sure. Have you clarified a purpose for your own life? Like, have you got a clear kind of North Star that you're kind of, I suppose, that orients you in life?
Yes, but it also shifts. So I have a North Star that is engaging people in thinking more deeply about their existence. And that might be their existence as parents or friends or leaders, or, just feeling more grounded and more resilient, having more resources and resilience for the inevitable future adversity. Right. So I think there's so much value in this existential way of thinking, developing an existential lens to look at yourself, your life, your relationships, your work. Right. When people go through that kind of process, they're better equipped to deal with what life throws at them. And also, I think they get more out of life in terms of more experiences. They meet life with more courage, and they have less regrets later on in life about what they should have, could have, would have done. Right. So that gives me a lot of meaning. But then also I do a lot of different things, and I like the novelty and the diversity to just allow myself to say yes to things that might not have anything to do with that, just because they seem fun and interesting. Right. So that way I do have a North Star, but also I do like detours and, I like to engage in life as it presents itself to me. I'm very present with what's right in front of me, and that sometimes distracts me from looking up at the North Star. Do you know what I mean?
I like that. I like that. Something I was curious to ask you about in this conversation was, to what extent can we separate a person from their philosophy? And you have philosophers like Heidegger, who
I was just thinking about him.
developed like amazing ways of looking at the world. Sartre as well, both existentialists, and then outside of the existential space, you have someone like Alan Watts that have these amazing views on life and ideas. But then whenever you dig into their personal lives, there's some really dark stuff in some cases, and I'm just wondering, what do you think about that? Can we separate a person from their ideas?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, right? Because in many ways, I would say yes, because if you've benefited from ideas of people that later turned out to be terrible people, I've gotten so much from Heidegger before I knew he had become a raging Nazi later in his life. That was shocking to me, right? It didn't change the ideas around the philosophy that he's built, it didn't take away the value I got from his ideas on phenomenology, on a way of inquiring into meaning, letting new meanings emerge by bracketing what you think you know and just really tuning into an experience. What he then decided to do with his life, I think that's separate from that. On the other hand, there was a German comedian, Moritz Neumeier, who very humorously offered, how do I get it together? It's like this guy who always came to the barbecue and made the most amazing steaks. And then it turns out that he ate his whole family. Like, would you still miss the steaks and really marvel in that experience? Or might it be a bit tainted? You know, do you still enjoy Michael Jackson's music or R. Kelly's? You know, I think it's tainted in some ways, but also art and philosophy can really stand the ideas. It's not about the person, it's about the ideas. And like terrible people can have amazing ideas. Like I can separate them, but in some cases it's just too entangled, right? So I can separate phenomenology from later Nazi activity because, you know, I can, that makes sense to me. R. Kelly, I haven't listened to so much. You know, Michael Jackson, still very much on my playlist. So I don't know. I think it depends on how we connect these webs in our heads. And that's something that people need to negotiate with themselves. I don't think I can talk about phenomenology and people aren't immediately like, oh, but Heidegger was a Nazi. You know, I don't, but I don't mind mentioning his name because he did produce one of the most important works of philosophy. And I mean, he wouldn't be the first one who then later on fell off the rails and developed some crazy ideas because maybe he spent a little bit too much time in his cabin in the woods, you know? So it's also a matter of when was this piece of art or music or philosophy created, and then at what point did things occur that, you know, then give the person a really bad stench.
Yeah, it's a really tricky one. Like I can see both points of view. I was doing a degree in Glasgow a few years ago, and we had some friends over, and something came up about Harry Potter, and I was talking about what a great book it was, and I loved reading them growing up. And this girl was like, I can't believe you would say that after what J.K. Rowling said about trans people. And I had no idea what J.K. Rowling had said about trans people. So I was just like, right, okay. But it was so interesting because she had made that one comment on Twitter, that this person was now saying that those 7 books, which were just unbelievable, were now completely null and void and should be thrown into the fire. And I'm just like, I don't know if it's that simple, you know? But on the other hand, you know, like, I think like you'll be able to navigate this world much more effectively if you can separate people from their ideas and just like, okay, this person came up with this idea. How is this practically applicable, and can it improve life? And if it can, you know, take it on. If not, don't. But the thing to aim for, and the hard thing, is to be someone of integrity, where there isn't that separation, where like if you talk about something, you are an embodiment of that thing. And I think that's the hardest thing. That's one of the hardest things about being human, because we're all just born hypocrites. But that's worth aiming for, you know, because so few people achieve that.
Oh yeah, I'm really looking forward. I spent 20 years in the UK, in Germany now. People look at me, they give me very weird looks when I tell them I've never read Harry Potter or seen any of the movies. Like, it's unbelievable to them. And I'm really looking, it had nothing to do with what J.K. Rowling stands on trans people. Absolutely nothing. I just never really got around. It was like after my time. I was already, I don't know, like 15, 16 or something when I came out. Just that passed. And I'm so looking forward to start reading that with my daughter, who's going to turn 4. We have a few years to go. And then I'm so looking forward to reading that with them, because I've also heard they're just absolutely amazing. If they were riddled with anti-trans messaging, or the whole idea behind the books would be supporting that idea that some people are worth less, or like, I haven't read too much into, I mean, not read too much, but I'm not too familiar with her stance, what exactly she meant, what exactly she said. I know a lot of people are very upset, and I've seen a few things that I was like, oh wow, yeah, I hadn't expected that. So if the books were riddled with kind of these kind of messages, oh yes, that would be problematic, but then not. So I mean, I hear, I haven't read them, right? So I can't judge. But I think some people would have made that connection and would have been public knowledge by now. So yes, in that way we can separate it, but I understand if some people can't separate it. I get it.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, and we live at a time now where even if you bring this kind of thing up, you're almost like there's people will be listening to this waiting for one of us to slip up and say something, and then you're all of a sudden you're cancelled, so you've got to be yeah, you got to tread carefully.
Watch your mouth, Niall. Oh, you're off script. We're off script or no?
All right. So you're a coach. You've been coaching for, I'd say, over a decade now. Would it be roughly?
15 years now. Yeah, 16, 17, 16, 17, something like that.
Wow. Okay. And for someone listening to this to sort of, played with the idea of hiring a coach, what would you say to that person to sort of get them off the fence? And like, why is this beneficial? Why is this important? Like, how can coaching actually make a difference in somebody's life? Why invest?
Yeah. How do I answer that? I mean, I'm very biased, right? Because I'm from within that world, but I wasn't always in that world. So maybe I'll take you back to when I discovered coaching. I had been interested in psychotherapy and counseling because I recognized the value of having a relationship that allows you to just turn up as you are and not be judged for who you are or what you think. And you can bring out your deepest, darkest, weirdest, oddest thoughts and feelings, and you'll just be embraced and held space and just allow yourself to look in the mirror, right? But with someone who invites you to maybe go deeper or look over there and gets really curious about who are you and what makes you tick and why do you do the things that you do and what do you want and what do you care about and what do you value and what's important to you. Like, there's so many questions that a coach and a therapist would ask you that just other people don't ask you, right? And even when other people do ask you, they're either on some level judging you, and it takes some time. I've trained so many coaches in my life. It takes some time to really learn to bracket your judgments. It's not impossible to not have any judgments, but to really hold space. I trained a group of supervisors earlier, and there was a 20-minute session, and this person later revealed that they felt a lot of judgments about what this coach was talking about one of their clients. They were very angry and they were outraged by how this person could treat them in that way. But nobody picked up on it. And the client even commented like, it's so nice to be with you because like, there's no judgment whatsoever, and that's why we train. We train to be able to hold space. And, it's not that we never bring any of ourselves into the conversation. It's not that we never disclose an opinion or offer an idea or, if it's existential coaching, at times there might be a philosophical perspective, just not that you should be having this perspective or, here's something that you should be thinking or looking at, or here's a truth about the world or what gives life meaning. It's more like, here's something that I believe, just as a different perspective. What do you think about that? So it's that kind of space where the quality of listening and the quality of presence is so good that you can courageously face yourself. And given that it's not someone who you see tomorrow at the party or when you go back home every day, it's not a friend that you're risking the relationship. If it gets awkward and you don't want to do this anymore, you can just say goodbye and never see this coach ever again. And so I noticed that, especially online, sometimes people say a lot more and open up a lot more because that you're not even in their city. So it feels even more safe to just show up as you are. And that means for some people, it's the first time they say things out loud that they previously never dared to even finish the thought because it feels shameful or dangerous or risky, right? And having a space where you can just be fully yourself and experiment maybe with being a different self and make some wild plans or share some thoughts that you're afraid people will judge you on. It's just you don't often have those kind of spaces, and especially in the age and day that we are less and less connected, right? Everybody's trying to put their best put forward. Social media started that way. Everybody portrayed themselves in this best possible light. That changed a bit, and people really showed up very vulnerable. But having somebody there and present with you, even if it's online, even if it's via Zoom, there's a quality of presence that is just invaluable, right? And that allows people to open doors and figure some things out that otherwise they wouldn't have. And even just sometimes to release something, even just to speak your mind and let some things out. It's just so valuable, right? So there's so many different kinds of coaching, so many different kinds of therapy. So it's a very different kind of coaching that maybe I do, where there's a lot of holding space and kind of looking at what else might be connected. And there's also kind of like life, the kind of American style life coach that has a lot of life wisdom and offering it to you. So when somebody's on the fence about coaching or had some bad experiences with coaching or has a certain idea of what coaching is, nobody knows what coaching is because coaching in general doesn't exist. There's so many different facets. It's such a large umbrella term. So it's like the people who they're like, oh, therapy doesn't work for me because I worked with one therapist and just didn't do anything. It doesn't say anything about therapy in general. It says everything about that particular therapist at that particular time. Right. So for somebody who's sitting on the fence, either because they don't know what coaching is or what it could do for them, just have a couple of conversations with a couple of different coaches. Almost all coaches will give you some time at no cost just to kind of have an experience, see what it's like, have a conversation, explore what it might be like working together, and then you can make a decision. So that's something that is low risk. Like if you don't pay for it, like what are you risking? Like a couple of hours of your time to have potentially life-changing conversations. So just shop around, ask some people, try some people out. There's plenty of coaches. I saw this LinkedIn post the other day, somebody looking for a coach, and they had like 270 responses. When you do, maybe check the coach out, see if they actually did some training, or maybe ask them if they're in supervision. Are they a member of a professional body? Like, what's their background? How do they get into it? Ask the coach some questions. Ultimately, it's important how you feel with someone. It seems like someone you can open up to and someone that you have a good relationship with. So training is not everything, right? Just because somebody didn't do formal training doesn't mean that they're a bad coach. It can, But there's a couple of such questions that would be helpful just to kind of check who that person is and how seriously they take their work.
For sure.
Let me pause there.
I love what you said there about, a coach can provide a space where you can courageously face yourself, particularly the parts of yourself that you might never get a chance to express with your friends, your family, parts of yourself that you might just have sort of kept in the shadow, and that you can't put a price on that. And I think another thing you said there is about this idea of presence and that being a key element of this. And I think that's so important for people that are in the profession too, to keep that in mind, because there's a big fear now of AI coming in and, you won't there won't be a need for coaches because it'll all just be done on ChatGPT, et cetera. But I don't think we're
There's
ever going
no
to get this
presence.
stage where ChatGPT is going to be able to provide a space of presence. That's something that can't go into the cloud.
But that's by definition something it cannot do. One of my colleagues, Jerry Colonna, who I really, really like. If you don't know Jerry, you should definitely have him on at some point. Oh yes, great. Yeah, he's lovely. He said you can't scale presence, right? And by definition, an AI cannot have presence. I mean, I'm sure there's different definitions of what it means to be present. It might give you the illusion that it's very interested in you, but it cannot really be very interested in you. And even if there's a form of AI that has some sort of agency and is interested in you in some way, it's not present. Like it's not like it might pay attention or it might analyze things well, but it cannot replace being with you. And to date, it's impossible for AI to just be with you. I've spent a few months trying to prompt an AI reflective practice buddy, hoping to develop some sort of AI supervisor for coaches. It worked to some extent, and it's a helpful tool to help you reflect. But what I realized is it cannot hold space. It cannot just shut up and let you talk. It cannot just say, "Tell me more. What do you mean? Go a bit further. I'm listening," or just wait until you continue talking. Right? We managed to get it to only ask one question at a time and not like give you this whole long response thing. And it's developing further and further, right? But it will never be actual presence. That's impossible.
Yeah, it's actually quite annoying sometimes. It's like a know-it-all. It's like here's the perfect answer. Now, would you like me to do that in German as well? Like it's just like it's annoying. Sometimes you just want someone to listen and
That can be managed with the prompting, right? There's ways in which it can keep asking you questions and only one at a time and not just give you answers. Sometimes it, deviates from what it's being prompted to do, but like there are some CoachBot systems that are well prompted. If anybody's interested, maybe you're a coach or maybe you'd like to reflect on something, not just about coaching, happy to reach out and I'll share you my prototype. But there's some things it just can't do by design, right? And we're living in such interesting times when a lot of people will think they have relationships with AIs, but it's an illusion, right? Because you think it cares about you, but it cannot care, right? It's a system. It's artificial intelligence. It cannot actually have empathy, even though it feels like it has empathy. And that is a really interesting challenge for us, right? Because the placebo effect is real. Even if there is no real empathy, if it's expressing empathy, you can still feel empathized with, and that has a lot of value. So I can see how relationship with an AI can really help to alleviate loneliness, but it remains an illusion because it doesn't actually care and it's not actually a friend, right? It's just an illusion, but that illusion can really help people. So I'm really in two minds about the benefits to mental health versus the massive pitfalls.
like everything is a double-edged sword. It just depends what way the way it's used.
Well, coaches will see that a lot more in therapists, right? We will talk to a lot of people who will like coaching. A lot of coaching is about relationships. Clients need to figure out how to navigate relationships with their bosses or staff or partners or children or friends or the world, right? But more and more, these entities that they have relationships with will be AI. Even if it's an imagined relationships, it's still if the relationship is only one-sided, it's still a relationship. So that'll be super interesting because it will be quite common, I think, 10, 20 years from now, at the most, to have AIs in your life as their own entities.
Yeah, I think it's life is relationship. I spoke with a guy yesterday, was it yesterday, the day before, Michael Allison. He's writing this book on polyvagal theory and coaching. And one of the things he discovered in his research for that book is that whenever your mind is oriented in relationship, even if you're by yourself, it changes the physiology of your nervous system. Your vagal tone increases, and you're more in a what's the word? You're more in a dorsal vagal. I can't remember what the term is, but basically, even if people aren't present, if your mind is oriented towards a particular relationship, a particular person, and your thoughts are on them, then it calms the nervous system down. So it's like, I don't know. Something I wanted to ask you, Yannick, was about, I've had coaching from you and I found it really, really powerful. But whenever you are entering before a coaching session, what is the underlying frame you're going into that session with? What are the sort of what's the word? What's the operating system that you're sort of taking into that conversation so that it goes well?
Yeah. It's funny. The answer is, I think, quite the opposite to the question, because I'm kind of trying to free myself from any operating systems so I can be really present, because whatever operating system I'm bringing into the conversation or into the relationship is influencing the relationship. Right? So when I'm tuning into a coaching session, or particularly when I meet someone for the first time, I want to take some time to acknowledge all the assumptions that I'm bringing into this. Just based on the name or the few information I have about them, or maybe I have a lot of information about them. Maybe I even met them years ago and think I know them. Right? It's harder to work with people that you think you know. That's why it's so difficult to work with people that you have a dual relationship with, right? There might be a client, but there might also be a friend or a work colleague or someone from the book club or whatever. So I'm trying to free myself from all these assumptions, at least for the moment. I can always, I kind of picture it as having this box next to me that I put all my stuff in, and all my beliefs and all my assumptions and all my values and everything that I think I know, which is never the truth. It's just mine. So I put that all in my box and I put the lid on, and that box will necessarily rattle and sometimes jump up and down, and sometimes there'll be stuff coming out of the lid. And I kind of sometimes in my mind just push that box with my foot a little further away, or put the lid back on, or just trying to manage that. There's a time when it's really helpful to open the box and look at what am I thinking, what am I feeling, what are my opinions, what are my values. Do I have some tools, exercises, books I could recommend, ideas that might be helpful to broaden a perspective? That there's helpful stuff in our books. But when I'm meeting someone, I really want to meet them with a blank slate as much as possible, so I can really spend some time with them, so they feel like I'm really with them. I don't have an agenda. Right? So there's coaches who come in with an agenda, and that's why they get hired, because people want to tap into their agenda. I'm not knocking it, but I see benefit in that, but I see more benefit in, first of all, really meeting someone. And it feels amazing when somebody's tuning into you like that, because you can feel whether there's an agenda and whether somebody wants to take you somewhere. And if that's what you want, great. You choose someone, but that's more of a mentor in my eyes, right? Or a guide or a guru or a teacher. And a coach in my eyes is different. It's somebody who really holds space and helps you figure out your own answers, especially an existential one. So that's how I'm tuning into sessions.
Yeah, I really like that. And I'd say that's quite difficult to do in the moment. Whenever I'm doing these interviews, if I do have sort of like a structure and an agenda, I'm trying, certain questions I want to ask in a certain order, then what happens is it literally blinds you from what's happening in the conversation, because the person's speaking and they're saying some things that are really, really valuable, that if you just slightly opened them up and got them to expand on it, then it always leads somewhere really meaningful. If you're so focused on your agenda, it blinds you to the reality of the situation, and people sense that and they don't like it. So it's not easy, but it's worth doing. In you're very informed in this area, and for me, I think a great way to learn an art is by observation. So I was just curious, if you had to pick, say, between 1 and 3 coaches and would be the only coaches you could observe to really, if you wanted to master the craft, who might you pick? And these are the only 3 you could pick.
Oof. um, that's an impossible question. I mean, if I were to pick, because it really depends on what kind of coaching you want to master, right? So, for example, me, So I actually booked some of those for the coaching lab next year. This year. One of them is Yaki Martinez. Yaki Martinez Robles. He's a Mexican existential coach who, back in the day, built a relationship with Irvin Yalom and just kind of reached out, and really phenomenological, really, really cool guy. I really like him, right? I met him a few times in Mexico City. He's great to. I haven't seen him in action. That's why I invited him to do a session in the coaching lab, which will happen later this year. He works phenomenologically, and he gave me the most simple answer to the question, when does coaching become therapy? And he said, if it's less than 6 sessions, it's coaching. If it's more than 6 sessions, it's therapy. Right? And from his phenomenological stance, it makes a lot of sense, because he's not going to work differently with you if it's a therapy client versus a coaching client, because of the way that he works. Right? But it's about the depth that you can go into based on the time that you have available, the pace. Right? So that I found really interesting. So I've met him a number of times. We hung out. He has a book with the same name as mine, but in Spanish, an introduction to existential coaching, which is interesting. So, yeah, that is someone currently, right, that I really want to learn from without actually knowing how exactly it will look like. I also invited Emmy van Derzen, who's a therapist, but she's also co-created the Masters in Existential Coaching. But I've not seen her do a coaching session. I've talked to her many times. I got trained to her to some extent. So I really like her way of being, and I'm really curious about how that translates into the coaching. So maybe I'll take that back, because it's not. I think it will expand coaching, but it's not. She's not a coach. She's a therapist who also does coaching. So, I really like David Drake, the founder of narrative coaching, and if I had to pick existential coaches, I might pick different ones. But David, I really like, because so much of the world is about narratives, and narratives not just in terms of this. Like, we always tell stories, and the idea of what a story is also quite a broad umbrella term. So David's presence is quite phenomenal. So that's somebody I would learn from. And I was really impressed by spending a bit of time with Julie Starr. She wrote the coaching manual and the mentoring manual, and she does mainly corporate work, but her presence is just incredible. Like, I met the first time I met her very briefly. One of those moments where you feel much more seen than you're comfortable with. Right? I had a short chat with her, and she asked me a question that pointed to something that I did not think I was revealing in any way, shape, or form, but she saw it. And that made me quite uncomfortable, but in a good way, right? It wasn't quite the context in which I was like, "Ooh, she saw way more than I'm like, oh, that feeling when somebody sees something that you thought you were protecting and hiding, and they just see it and they reflect it back, but in a very natural, curious way." Right? That was very powerful experience. Oh my God, I have to get back on that question, because these are just the people that come to my mind right now.
For sure. Okay, last question. Any good existential movies or documentaries you'd recommend for people? Anything that come to mind there?
Yes, hundreds. So I want to say I have an existentialism for all project. It's called This is Existential. I'll send you the link. I reckon you have it already, but like I keep track of all the publications that are happening in existential coaching. I've put all the references in there that I put in my book, but the core part of it is that anybody who has seen a movie or a show or a novel or a cartoon or like a piece of art and culture that somehow illustrates something around the existential experience is invited to add to it, right? So oh my god, where's that? There's one that is particular. There's a movie about god damn it, about an existential detective, and I think is it Ben Stiller, Adam Sandler, something like that. Oh shit. It'll name pop back into my head later. There's a movie called Seven Samurai, which is like from the 50s, which is a lot of existential themes. There's a graphic novel called Day Tripper, which normalizes death in a way that I had never seen before. At some point, it just becomes a thing that happens. And it was an amazing experience, not just super beautifully drawn and written, but it also just, existentialists love talking about death and endings and temporality, and just to normalize that that's happening. It's phenomenal. Day Tripper that's amazing. I think the brothers are called they're Portuguese, Brazilian, I think. So yeah, let me stop there. We'll share the link in the.
Yeah, let's definitely share the link in the show notes. Yannick, it's been so fun speaking with you. Thank you so much for sharing some of your wisdom and knowledge with us today. Where can people find you online, learn more about your work, and get your book?
Yeah, easiest would probably be existential.coach. That's my main website that kind of encapsulates it. I have a fairly active YouTube channel. You can find me on LinkedIn. If you Google my name, I'll be there. So yes, if you're a coach, I mentioned the coaching lab. So gocoachinglab.com. We're at lab number 71 now. So if you're looking at what coaching could actually look and feel like, could also be for non-coaches if you just want to check out a lot of different styles of coaching. We do like 45-minute demos and then reflections for 45 minutes. So you really get to take a good look under the hood of coaching and what goes on in the minds and thoughts of experienced coaches as they work with someone. Coaches who look for supervision or want to become better coaches, my website for coaches is rocketsupervision.com.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks, Yannick. Until next time.
Thank you, Niall.
If you enjoyed this episode, you might also enjoy getting our 7 Insights newsletter. This is a once per month email where I share 7 of the most valuable insights I've uncovered in the previous 30 days. It includes book, podcast, and documentary recommendations, as well as questions and quotes specifically curated to help you live a more creative, intentional, and meaningful life. It currently goes out to over 50,000 subscribers each month. And if you're interested in joining them, you can sign up via the link in the description.